We met on TikTok. I learned about you and a bit about your story, which you shared on TikTok, talking about how you more or less left the alt right. This got me very much interested because a lot of young people at the moment are becoming more and more right wing at the moment, and you're going sort of the opposite way. I think it is interesting, not just for people in the UK, but also here in Switzerland, to hear your story and maybe what kind of doubts you had about the alt right or about fascism, far right, whatever you want to call it. So you can start introducing yourself.
I'm Callum. I'm 19. I, of course, live in England, and for a long time, for a couple of years, a few years ago, I used to be heavily kind of far right. I believed a lot of the red pill manosphere kind of talking points, even a lot of like the remigration kind of talking points for quite a few years. I was pretty misogynistic, racist, homophobic for kind of just all of the that you could have been. But I think a couple of years ago, I'll get a lot more into it over the course of the interview. But I really started to have doubts about a lot of those beliefs about 2023, 2024 time. And then by about the middle of last year, I kind of, at that point, I feel like the point where I just completely just shoved off the label. So and then since then, I've not looked back one bit.
Mm-hmm. So, when did you first get red pilled? When did you get involved? Or when did they, convert you more or less or convince you? What year was that around?
It was around 2020 in particular. It's the one that always keeps coming back to me. I think it was important that it was in 2020 because that was just in time for the COVID pandemic, for the lockdown. And so I basically just had 6 whole months to just sit in my room all day and just watch nothing but, well, I mean, it wasn't nothing, but it was kind of the content I was consuming was just kind of slowly just inching me more and more towards the right. I can't really remember exactly what kind of content I watched back then because it was like 5 years ago, but I do remember kind of only really hearing the right wing kind of talking points. It was this idea that like everything in the country was like kind of fine, and then more and more immigration started happening, and then it all just started going to shit, really. And I mean, I was 14 at the time, so it was really easy for me to start believing a lot of this stuff. Like I didn't really know much better at the time. I kind of just thought, and then you start to hit. Oh yeah, do you know who Tommy Robinson is?
I've heard about him, but not in depth. Maybe you have more information.
He's pretty much just this kind of. He's like a football hooligan who then became like the leader of a far right group called the English Defence League at the time, and he basically was running this idea that there were like grooming gangs across the country, and he tried to kind of weaponize that because a lot of them were specifically Muslims, and so he very much kind of used that to say he used it to make a lot of generalizations that this was specifically a Muslim problem, and then he got arrested a few times because of contempt of court. And so, but he ended up framing it as a free speech problem, like the British government were actively trying to go after him. And so, like, for a lot of like young guys who don't really know much better in life, they kind of believe what they're kind of being told, that there's like this hidden secret truth that you're not allowed to talk about and that the governments are actively suppressing. And so, of course, that obviously piqued my kind of curiosity at the time. So I feel like in 2020, at the start of it, I was kind of at least relatively normal. By the end, I was the only kid in school who was supporting for Donald Trump in the election.
Hmm. And when did you start to have doubts?
About like right wing ideology in general, because
Hmm.
if so, I feel like that would be about 2023 ish, maybe around 2023, 2024 ish is when I've have that process of really slowly starting to, leave it like piece by piece. I was in it for a good couple of years.
So, were you in these 3 years part of any organization? Did you go on protests? Did you take part in any right wing actions or anything?
I didn't actually. No, I wasn't like going to these because in the UK now there's a lot of protests, usually outside of hotels in which asylum seekers are being held. There's a couple of protests that have been happening outside. I never went to any of those. There was, of course, a riot in Southport last year. I never went to any of those. I mean, first of all, I probably wasn't even old enough. Secondly, I wasn't really that type of person to just actively go out and just cause trouble. I was more so just, I guess I've always been a kind of keep to myself kind of person. So I was just the kind of one who was just kind of in my room, but I wouldn't have actively gone out and, like rioted, I suppose. Probably a lot for the better.
So, it was more online, the whole thing.
Pretty much predominantly, yeah, for the most part.
Did you have connections with any groups?
I wouldn't say with any specific groups, but like I did have some people who I talked to online. I'll keep them anonymous, but um, I can't. It just kind. They've found that kind of community online where I started talking to them via Discord, and it was just kind of. They just kind of kept me in, really. I suppose. But it did give me what I think is really crucial to the way a lot of people stay within these far right circles. It kind of gave me that sense of community, which was something I desperately lacked in my personal life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of partly what led me to stay there for so long, maybe.
Generally, young people, at least here in Switzerland, are lacking a sort of community, and it's clear that they then go to the far right or to the left, or they try to find any kind of community. Often that is exploited by cults or fascist groups or anything. And I think we are left wing. We are a left wing party. I think that our economic system, with giant corporations which hold a lot of power, are really not interested that we form any kinds of communities,
Totally agree with that.
because they want that we consume as much social media as possible, pay for Netflix and all of that, and not communicate with the outside world. That would be their optimal uh, world, I think.
It's just divide and conquer at the end of the day, really. It's kind of, I think that's what's contributing to a lot of this, that, you know, a lot of young people are like very kind of lonely now. They find it harder to form relationships with other people because everything's become, so virtual, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, and then when it comes to like real world issues, they see things like the cost of housing is incredibly expensive. The cost of just about everything has become incredibly expensive. And so it obviously breeds that kind of sense of hopelessness in a way,
Mm-hmm.
especially over here with like I don't know what the situation's like in Switzerland, but I know in the UK like housing is very expensive, and it's not uncommon to see like a lot of young people don't think they'll ever own a home in their whole life.
No,
So
it's the
obviously
same case here.
that's obviously going to do a lot in radicalizing
Mm-hmm.
people a lot, where they feel like if they feel like there's no future ahead of them, then like it'll be insane to believe they're not going to be radicalized in some way.
Yes, of course. And I think that the mainstream left, we call them lifestyle left, they have been ignoring this problem of incels, of men which think they don't have a future, or which think that women somehow are property, and that they should be required to get a woman, kind of. We think that ignoring this problem and not addressing it has further helped the far right to grow. as well, of course, in our view, focusing solely on identity politics and ignoring these issues. This is especially the case in Switzerland. The economic issues, like, as you said, the high rent, the low wages, kind of poverty. Of course, we don't have homelessness as much in Switzerland, but we do have a lot of struggling working families which hardly get along and have to pay huge amounts just for the rent.
It's kind of the same as that over here as well, but I mean, the UK also has a problem where I feel like our government a lot, especially in the last 30, 40 years, went all in on things like privatization and deregulation and kind of really gutted the social safety net. 'Cause we had 14 years of conservative government from 2010 to 2024, and they basically just kind of cut everything really to the bone, most of all education in particular. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, those problems are especially true over here, yeah.
Is that also under the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer?
Yeah, under Labour, like I feel like a lot of people were very disappointed to see that they've governed very similarly to the Conservatives have, where the first thing like Starmer says is that difficult decisions have to be made, and then it just feels very much like the period of austerity. And then earlier this year, he announced that there was going to be cuts to a disability benefit, which is called the personal independence payment, and that's
Mm-hmm.
something that a lot of people with disabilities have to, even many of those in work, have to rely upon. And so when the government announced they were cutting that, like there was huge amounts of backlash to it.
I never really believed in Keir Starmer because I know that Labour is similar to our Swiss party, the SP, the Social Democrats of Switzerland, which is the biggest left wing party, if you want to call it that. And they are maybe a tiny bit more left, more to the left than Keir Starmer. But they are also economically oriented and probably bribed. Who knows? But we know that in politics that is all very common. So my question is: you're obviously aware that the right wing is using identity politics, like saying women have to go back to working at home, back to the kitchen. They shouldn't have abortions. They should pray instead. That probably helps much more. And all of these basically unscientific things. Oh, and of course, that black people and brown people are less worthy than white people, and that there is some kind of supreme European, with all this safe Europe and stuff. Do you see now, like, do you also see kind of that they are reversing the identity politics?
What on the right? Um, Not sure, not necessarily sure if they'd reverse it. If anything, I almost feel like they'd, in the short term, be incentivized to do the opposite because from what I think, a big reason for the rise of the far right, in especially with ethnic nationalism, is the fact that the white population in many European countries has declined, and it's very with the long history of racism against non-white people in Europe. It's very very easy to believe it. Like maybe we don't have like the hard racism we used to have back in the day, but definitely that soft kind of racism kind of exists where instead of just outright racial discrimination like we used to have in the past, it's a lot more kind of prejudice, I suppose, in a way. But and that's why it makes me think that as the white population, like in the UK right now, 74% of the population was white British according to the 2021 census. It's probably actually lower now, and so what I think this is doing is causing a kind of scare among a lot of the white British population who have only especially a lot of older people who have only seen the country to be majority white. And so then there's this kind of idea that like the foreign nations where they come from are like backwards and underdeveloped, and so then they're going to turn our country into that. And so that's why I kind of think that there feels like there's so much desperation on the hard right at the moment, because if they believe in this idea of remigration, it's why I feel like they're getting more and more radical with this idea of like remigration. It's even slowly starting to creep its way into the UK as well, which is really, really scary to even think about. So
Yeah.
I think those demographic factors are very much a reason specifically for like the ethnic nationalism part. But then again, though, in the future, this might be an untenable thing, because if the countries do continue to get more diverse, which I think even if you cut off a lot of immigration, they still will, because of like foreign born people and like people like born from those immigrants, for example. Even if that does happen, then well, they're not going to be able to win elections. Even if they win, like say 50% of white people's votes, they're still not going to be able to win an election on that in the future. So there's going to be a really tough thing that they're going to have in the long term if they continue pushing this like ethnic nationalism.
I've heard a lot in England that people are saying that there are a lot of more um, Muslim people than there used to be, and you know, women walking around in burqas and all of this stuff, which the right claims. Do you also see that to be the case, or do you think we are just being fed lies, more or less?
If there's, well, there definitely are like a lot of like Muslim women, for example, walking around in burqas. Just I don't really see it as a bad thing, because I feel like it's just their personal choice at the end. Obviously, I have criticisms of like Islam as a religion, but I have
Mhm.
criticisms of like every religion. I just believe at the end of the day, it's their personal choice, and we shouldn't really be meddling in that. It's just that a lot of them are like pushing this massive alarmist scare,
Yeah.
just like, and it's pretty easy to sell to, especially a lot of older people who haven't probably have interacted with Muslims in particular less than, because a lot of us younger people have like been to school with them, so they don't seem like as foreign to us. But for a lot of older people who grew up in a very majority white country, and it was pretty rare to see an ethnic minority person, like I you can kind of tell that their views on it are kind of a lot more kind of radical, I suppose, in a way.
We also, of course, criticize religions. Basically, we criticize every religion, and we also think it is a personal choice. And of course, there are extremists. There are Christian extremists. There are Muslim extremists. There's probably that can be from every religion. There can be extremism. Um, do you think, or do you see any kind of radicalization which the right is talking about?
Um, I don't see any like overt radicalization within like kind of religious communities. So I feel like a lot of Muslim extremism, for example, that arose with groups like Al Qaeda, like the Taliban, like ISIS, kind of
Mhm.
arose as a consequence of Western interventionism in the Middle East. But if we actually genuinely look at like the majority of Muslims in the UK, the vast majority of them are not like crazy radicalized extremist terrorists. Like most of them are just ordinary, good, decent people just wanting to, just live their lives in peace. And so that's kind of a side of it that it often gets brushed off, because we see this a lot, because whenever there's attacks in the UK that are usually if it's a Muslim or brown skinned kind of person who attacks specifically like a white person, usually the media coverage on it is often very different compared to if it's like a white man attacking someone instead. And often that's the start of a lot of these protests that happens, is usually just after. an attack committed by either a Muslim or an undocumented migrant.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned a very good point, which is interventionism. We've criticized this for years and seen it on the entire political spectrum. People want interventionism, and then they talk about the problems which are created by interventionism. So, for instance, the far right loves to talk about refugees coming in, but they don't seem to understand that it's their wars which are causing these refugees to seek refuge in the first place. People run from their country because it's being bombed, because there is no infrastructure, and because the economy is dead. And people on the far right and even on the left don't seem to understand and grasp this, that if you bomb the shit out of a country, there's going to be tons of refugees coming.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, it even happens to majority like Christian countries, like what happened to Ukraine, where Ukraine's had millions of refugees and they never seem to have any problem with Ukraine because we had over 100,000 Ukrainian refugees
Hmm.
settle in the UK. Where was the massive right wing scare? It was nowhere. So it's very, very difficult to not see it as like a very kind of clear racism against, non European people.
Yeah, definitely.
And like, if it's especially the case, like, I find it very ironic that recently, the leader of our hard right party, Nigel Farage, in an interview, he's the leader of Reform UK, which is the UK's like very right wing kind of like MAGA party. Um, he literally said in an interview that he would deport um, women and like even women and children who arrived from Afghanistan back to Afghanistan. Which, if you know anything about the regime that currently rules Afghanistan, would just be it's just absolutely unbelievable that
Hmm.
like this discourse could even be considered normalized. But it's ironic that they want to stop refugees coming from Taliban ruled Afghanistan because wouldn't they be escaping from the Taliban? And we want them to live a better life than they would do over there.
This is what used to be the right wing position, that you say, come to us, come to the Western world, come to Europe. We give you a better life. Uh, at the time when the Eastern Bloc was still around, they said, "Oh, come here, we'll give you a better job," and all of that. And now this has suddenly changed, and now they say, "We don't want you here."
I think it does link back to kind of what I said, what you kind of alluded at earlier with the kind of decline of like the native population. Like I feel like it's kind of a common sentiment on the right to hear that specifically on not like the far right, but the kind of the more moderate-ish right of like we're not against immigration, we're just against illegal immigration. But often a lot like since the vast majority of immigration is done legally to the UK, over 95% is done legally. It is kind of hard to see like why would you be so preoccupied with only 5% of the source of immigration to the country? It just seems a bit, kind of like at least there's some elements of like kind of we need to have less immigration. I feel that's become almost like the centrist middle ground position here is that like they're not opposed to immigration, but they just believe that it's been too much lately because of the cultural change in the
Hmm.
country.
I mean, migration also has its economic downsides, like the job market can be irritated, if you want, because there is a surplus of people which are looking for a job. There are the giant corporations can pay migrants less if they want. Um, and of course, I'm sure there are some which go into crime, but of course, not all of them. And we've we do have rape attacks. Not every day, of course, but we do have that in Switzerland from refugees. But of course, then the right comes and says, "Oh, if we get rid of the refugees, then there's no rape." That's their
Yeah, which
logic.
obviously, like, wouldn't the main problem then be to resolve all of those like horrible crimes that get committed?
Definitely.
Because they never seem to have anywhere close to the amount of like over here in the UK. I've never seen any like right wing groups like protest over when like women are murdered. Because for 4 years ago, a woman named Sarah Everard was murdered by a white police officer. He was white, and so but most of the people who went out to demonstrate were women, and pretty much a lot of right wing groups said absolutely nothing about it. I've never seen them have one of the anywhere close to the same outrage whenever it's a white man who does any of these things to a woman, like anywhere or like any violent crime in general.
Yeah. Even I don't know if you know about this case, but probably you do. Giselle Bellicote, the French woman which was raped
Oh
over
yeah,
50 times, I think.
it's unbelievable.
And the right wing, even our right wing party, the biggest, the SVP, Swiss People's Party, they call themselves, said nothing about it.
I didn't even hear much outrage as well from like Nigel Farage and like Tommy Robinson, which is very ironic because they present themselves as the protector of women. But I mean, maybe they did tweet something. I'm not on Twitter, so I wouldn't really know. But I didn't really hear any statements about them. But oftentimes, if an attacker has been perceived as a migrant, they respond within like less than an hour. So it was very ironic that they didn't really say that much when that French woman had to go through what she did.
Or
I'd
is it?
say, yeah, it's mostly aligned with the AFD. Nigel Farage is known for being a massive bootlicker of Donald Trump. Like, whenever Donald, even going back as 2016, when Donald Trump made his infamous grab him by the pussy statement, like, Farage was the first one to defend it because he called it pub banter. Even in 2020, when Trump said, like, to use disinfectant to get rid of COVID, even he somehow managed to defend that on television as well. So I feel like he really is just copying like whatever's going on in America right now because he has a very close relationship with Donald Trump. I'd
Mhm,
say maybe it's a slightly one-sided relationship, but
mhm.
um, he's his policies are mostly for massive cuts to like social welfare and massive tax cuts that will, of course, disproportionately benefit. He literally wants a policy that will be tax exemptions for people who you have to buy this Britannia card, he calls it, where you pay £250,000 for tax exemption status in the UK, which, well, that clearly kind of shows, well, who he's going to prioritise.
Yeah, definitely.
His deputy leader, Richard Tice, has advocated for net zero immigration. He obviously wants to cut net zero because the party receives huge amounts of funding from the fossil fuel industry. So he wants to cut net zero and return the country to fossil fuels. Kind of everything that Trump promised to do in America. Um,
And do you know how it came about?
It kind of, well, the rise of it is kind of complex because before Reform UK, we had a party called UKIP, which is called
Mm, mhm.
The UK Independence Party. They were initially mostly a single issue party of getting the UK out of the EU at the time, and Nigel Farage was their leader as well. But after Brexit happened, he got behind the Prime Minister Boris Johnson in 2019 when Boris Johnson promised to get Brexit done. And so after that, then the kind of right wing conservatives who were not really happy with how moderate Boris Johnson was being on immigration ended up making their own party, and that's when Reform comes about as becoming the UK's kind of right wing party as the Conservative Party under Boris Johnson, and then especially under like Liz Truss after kind of just collapses really in popularity in during 2022.
Or do people like Tommy Robinson, um, do they have like a membership in that party, or are they even spokespersons, or is it still separate, but they support each other?
Tommy Robinson is a very interesting case because Nigel Farage has actually condemned Tommy Robinson, and Tommy Robinson doesn't actually support reform because they're not extreme enough for him. Um, and Nigel Farage doesn't want to associate himself with Tommy Robinson because he's almost like too extreme in a way, and like he's seen as like a thug.
Yeah.
That'll probably scare off a lot of because he's trying to on the one hand, he needs to keep his own base riled up and angry about immigration and any issue that comes to mind, but he also can't associate with people like Tommy Robinson because that'll scare off the kind of centre right middle class voters that he's trying to win over now. That's why he's talking about the economy, more about slashing the nanny state and about cutting benefits. So it is like a very big kind of tightrope that he has to walk, especially
Hmm.
also considering his relationship with Donald Trump as well.
Yeah, but they do all appear on protests.
Um, Usually, oh yeah, and Tommy Robinson actually like really heavily went off against Nigel Farage earlier by like I think he in one interview he literally deemed him a traitor. So you can kind of see that there's a lot of kind of bad blood between those two in particular. So there is a bit of disunity, but I think Tommy's usually he. There was a month ago a big protest called the Unite the Kingdom protest where over 100,000 people went into London. It was led by Tommy Robinson in particular, and even Elon Musk went in via video call there
Oh,
to
okay.
tell
Yeah.
them all to fight, whatever the hell he meant by that. So clearly just trying to stir up trouble in this country. Um, but I don't really think Nigel Farage even said that much about that, which kind of again shows he doesn't want to be associated with Tommy Robinson, even though a lot of the people who support him are more than willing to get out there and wave all of their flags in London.
Hmm. And Andrew Tate, or is he more or less the same?
Andrew Tate, I feel like, is just someone who's massively dropped off in relevance after 2023. I feel like no one even talks about him anymore, to be honest.
Hmm.
It's kind of sad for him, but he ended up being the most popular guy in the world 3 years ago, and now he's basically just irrelevant. So I
Oh,
don't think he
okay.
really does much, but I haven't really heard anything from him, so I don't really know.
Do you also, at the time when you were becoming right wing, we also wrote this as one of our questions. Um, did you see like there was no positive, proper role for young men?
Um,
If you know what I mean, like a
I
good
think.
role model.
Oh yeah, that's another thing as well. I think particularly from the kind of Andrew Tate and how a lot of these podcast bros like Joe Rogan's, the Logan Pauls, the Theo Vons, and that all went over to Trump and supported Trump. I think that's did what caused a lot of young men to kind of shift rightwards. I think the whole topic with young men is so incredibly kind of complex as a
Hmm.
whole. I feel like a lot of their isolation was going kind of going back to I think what it all stems for is that women and men are shifting in different directions. That a lot of young women have been raised by the kind of housewives of yesteryear who kind of told them to stay away from those traditional roles, like don't become financially dependent on a man, like carve out your own path in life, go and get your career sorted, get that in check, and delay
Yeah.
having kids until you're ready for it. And so what we've seen with women is that they've increasingly abandoned the kind of traditional like trad wife kind of lifestyle as they've wanted to pursue their own choices and their own paths in life. I think for a lot of men, it's a very different picture. I think a lot of men have not abandoned the traditional kind of stereotypically masculine roles in the past, in which you kind of just needed, back in the day, you kind of just needed a paycheck and like decent amount of stability. And because women couldn't really work back then, you could just kind of be guaranteed a wife, I suppose. But we don't really live in that time anymore. But since a lot of women can now provide for themselves, but a lot of young men don't really get taught like emotional intelligence that much because it's seen as like a more feminine thing. And so what's happening now is that you've got a lot of men who kind of are sticking in the times of yesteryear, but a lot of women have like heavily moved on from that. And the fact that like this is a very, very difficult reality then for a lot of men to reconcile with, especially if you're like very insecure about your ability to have friendships or relationships like 14, 15-year-old me was.
Hmm. So, what if you can, if we have maybe a young far right winger, what would you want to say to him if you can?
This is actually a really difficult question, I'll be honest. I'll try my best. I feel like there'd be so much though. It'll be an hours long conversation on that. But I feel like I'd just say that like we're all just people at the end of the day who just want the best for at least I hope like we want the best for our countries, for our communities, for our families. And so I feel like then it's just our obligation to treat everyone, particularly people of different backgrounds as well, with at least a kind of wanting to understand like their story as well, and find out that with like people of an immigrant background or people who are like LGBT, like many of them have very similar backstories to a lot of us, you know, like straight white people. And so I think one of the things learning that for me that about hearing other people going through kind of the loneliness and isolation that I was going through was something that heavily started to change my mind because it gave that sense of, relatability. And
Hmm.
it's obviously frustrating looking at like the cost of living situation, but I think about it kind of this way, like how billionaires have doubled their wealth in the last 5 years. And like these massive firms are just buying up basically everything. They're buying up shops, they're buying up housing, they're buying even healthcare now in like the UK, especially in like America. Meanwhile, for a lot of the average people, life is not getting much better. But for people with extreme levels of wealth that you just can't even comprehend, they're living it massive. They've got, and even when you dare suggest taxing them just a little bit more, like they'll always have such a massive backlash to it. So at the end of the day, like kind of pick what do we want to change? Like, are we going to continue kind of demonizing people that we don't really like, even though they have far more in common with us than much of the media would want us to portray? Or do we kind of direct that anger and ask the people at the very top who have all of the wealth and power to just hand out that little bit more to make society infinitely better? I guess that'll be kind of my, very summarized message to a lot of people on the right that we're not enemies at all. We all just want the best for society, but that we should demand those from the people at the very top, and we shouldn't be demonizing people we have a lot in common with.
It's the giant corporations which are distracting you. If you look at America and you can see that Donald Trump was elected, who was at his inauguration party? It was the billionaires, owners of giant corporations. It wasn't small family businessmen. It wasn't the working families. It wasn't farmers. It was the owners of giant corporations, and we can see more and more
The
it's
only people who
becoming so
benefited
clear.
from his policies.
Yes, and the fascists support them. The fascists are in favor of them. they want, they don't care about small businesses, they don't care about farmers, and they definitely do not care about employed people. All they care about is the giant corporations, and of course, their dream world of a ethnically pure and race whatever kind of state. Ethno nationalist state is what they call it. But they basically just want to bring back a Hitlerist uh, system.
I mean, I think Elon Musk made that very clear with what he did at, well, Trump's inauguration. He just felt so dystopian, kind of watching these men with tens or hundreds of billions of dollars in wealth who were all supporting Donald Trump. And then you have to ask, is this really going to benefit the average ordinary American? And well, his policies absolutely have not. Where millions of people have lost their health insurance, where like particularly farmers and manufacturers are feeling the massive effects of his tariffs. So causing a very hard time for businesses. That's causing a hard time for American consumers.
Yeah.
And so at that point, you have to ask, with all of this, is he truly making America great if all of this is happening? And do you want this to happen to your own country? And I say for the UK, absolutely hell no.
Do you or did you, when you became radicalized first, did you have criticisms of the left wing, which you maybe still hold today? For instance, about identity politics or the way most leftists act or react to certain things?
I'm, if I have to guess, I'm trying to think of I think things might be getting better, but maybe that's just because of my For You page healing itself a bit. But I'm not really sure to be, or maybe I'm just putting my personal experience into it. I think there are definitely some things people on the left sometimes do that annoy me, like when people immediately go on the attack against any kind of normal person on the ground. Because I feel like if we're going to direct our attacks, like it should solely be against the people calling all of these shots, like people like Nigel Farage, like Donald Trump, like any of these like hard right politicians. Like go on, fully attack them, verbally, obviously. Um, but like for it's kind of, I feel like, difficult, especially if you have such a massive fixation on identity politics,
Mm-hmm.
of saying like, I think the left have many people on who a small left wing have kind of backed off on this quite a bit since, which is welcome to see that. Like, if you're just a man, you're just inherently privileged, and like if you're white, then you're like inherent. Like, I do believe there is obviously truth to, like, white privilege and like male privilege, but but that comes across to a lot of poorer white men in particular, that people on the left are calling them privileged when clearly they don't think that they're privileged. I say most people at all are not privileged. Like, I think the only people are privileged are the people I mentioned earlier, like the Elon Musks, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Jeff
Definitely.
Bezos, the Bill Gates. Like, so I think yeah, if the left mostly focused more on economic issues, it's an incredibly easy message to win people over. And like, you don't have to compromise any bit on the rights of like disabled people, the rights of transgender and LGBT individuals, like compromise on women's rights at all. You don't have to do any of that. And if we mainly address issues the majority of the population care about, like the cost of living, like about like whether their kid can afford to like go to school and university, and about the quality of people's healthcare, then it's an easy election winner, in my opinion.
Here in Switzerland, we see it that we differentiate between left wing identity politics and right wing identity politics. And I actually also wrote a book about this. It's called
Oh,
Restart
nice.
Feminism and Stop uh, Division. And there's basically more left wing kind of woman, and here a McDonald's worker, and here a more traditional woman, and there's this kind of split which has happened in history. It used to be that women used to have to work at home, and then, as we call them, the lifestyle left came and told them, "You're free now. You can go and work at work as well." So now they have to work at two places. So it's not real liberation. It's not that the um, family is being supported as a whole, but it's just now more labor for women. And of course, men which do help, husbands and wives, which do help each other. But we are also seeing more and more this trend again of saying, no, the old model was better. And the reason why we see this here in Switzerland is um, some things were absurd, like uh, in the German language we can make like gender symbol more or less in our textual writing, and even in speaking you can pause kind of, and a lot of people were unhappy with that, and we didn't vote on it or anything. And we believe over the years people have been pissed off exactly by this behavior which you said, that hardworking families are being told that they're privileged and that they should shut up about their needs, and that it's only the others which are important. And because there is no alternative, they went to the fascists. And this is what has been happening basically all of Europe.
Well, you know what you when you said earlier about like women having to work multiple jobs, I think like this is kind of a two-pronged kind of issue because number one, a lot of young women who are feeling incredibly atomized by like the corporate life, working the endless 9 to 5, maybe even more than that. Almost probably the trad wife lifestyle almost sounds too good to be true in a way.
Yeah,
So I think a lot some like I would say a majority even of young women are enticed into this. I'd say a significant cohort are like, come on, there has to be something better than this. And then they see tradwife influencers online saying, just abandon your corporate jobs and become financially dependent on a man. What could go wrong? And then as the second thing as well is that it highlights even more gendered problems if a lot of women have to simultaneously carry out the burden of most of the housework because that was traditionally what was expected of women, and simultaneously have to be a big breadwinner of the household.
yeah,
I think that's causing a lot of women to not even want to seek relationships with men, especially because a lot of men haven't really been kind of taught to be an equal partner, to take on that like the housework and also like to have a more 50-50 relationship. So I feel like a lot of men have been brought up with the idea of like the kind of old school traditional kind of style. But of course the world's so much different now because women are so actively in the workforce. And
yeah.
so I feel like this is almost just pushing women and men pretty far apart because of that.
And the right is, of course, using this and pushing them even more apart. And another thing, um, the whole tradwife model in this economy, it won't even work because both have to work so they can even support a family in most cases. And of course, if someone wants to be a home mum or a home dad, I mean that's fine. If you can afford that, if both parties agree, that's okay. But pushing it on our society, on the entire society, and telling them that it's somehow going to benefit them, it's just complete rubbish.
I know, yeah. It's like, I mean, I feel like a lot of the kind of tradwife phenomenon came from overwhelmingly middle class 1950s America. But I find it odd that like the right fixates so heavily on this very middle class, so time specific and country specific lifestyle. Like even in the 1950s in the UK, it was nothing like the American 50s. There's a video I actually liked by made by Brit Monkey, that was called The Myth of the 1950s, where it exposes that the 1950s were not this like trad life conservative paradise that a lot of particularly American conservatives like to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
especially for like because this was literally the days of racial segregation, so it was definitely not like this for African Americans. For the majority of working class families, it was normal for both the man and the woman to work. Um, so like it's kind of a very like it's was very much not reflective of how most people lived back in the day. It's very much a myth that I find fairly annoying now that I see being pushed so much because it was such an overwhelmingly middle class suburban kind of life because those were the only people who could afford to
Probably
have like
also
a
the
full
rich.
time. Yeah, as well. Like I feel like you have to be like rich in order to even live that kind of life. It's just a lot of working class women historically. They definitely did work. They worked all day, but it's just a lot of their labor was mostly domestic and so it was unpaid
Yeah.
and women just got paid less than men. I mean, they still do to this very day, but especially back then.
And even if you look at 1920s, 1930s in Europe, um, in some countries, both of them actually worked. So, for instance, Austria, that was the case. And of course, did they have a happy, rich life? No, of course not. It was um, further exploitation, um, and that is why, of course, you had strikes and all of this, which is interesting because more than ever, working people should be striking, but they're distracted by identity politics. They're distracted by social media, and they are being distracted by everything else possible, the news in general, everything to prevent them from realizing the fact that they're being stuffed by the giant corporations. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's like especially because much of the media is owned, at least in the UK and America, the Anglosphere by people like Rupert Murdoch,
Yep.
who he's a man billionaire who owns Fox News in America. He owns a channel called Talk TV over here. He like own things either the Daily Express or the Daily Mail. He owns Sky News for a while. He owns news channels all around the world, just endlessly pumping this hard right propaganda into people. Obviously, Twitter's now owned by Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm.
Meta's owned by Mark Zuckerberg. Even Donald Trump has his own social media platform, though it is kind of fortunate that no one cares enough to use it.
Yeah.
GB News,
Mm-hmm.
our like hard right news channel, is owned by I forget his name, but he has a net worth of just under £1 billion. So you start to notice a little bit of a pattern here.
Yeah, yeah, of course. In Switzerland, we still have a lot of local news, but we also have Tamedia, which is kind of a group which then has subgroups, and then they have uh, newspapers, but digital ones, of course, and not just print ones. We do have the national news, and the national news is kind of center left because of a lot of center left people are working there. But they would never talk about corporate power or anything, of course. It's just they use identity politics again to, well, basically push their own agenda in some cases.
It's sort of like that over here in the UK, where our national news channel, the BBC,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of basically kind of centre, really as close to centre as you can kind of get. Um, but the BBC has kind of fallen out of favour with a lot of people, as a lot of the right have just moved to channels like GB News and Talk TV, or even just like the alt right spaces online. Um, there are still a few left wing papers, like The Guardian is one of them, which started out as like a very one of the few work like papers that was historically owned by working class people and was an
Mm-hmm.
arm of like trade unions. Um, but like even like much of like the UK kind of left wing media is now mostly online, like Novara Media and like Politics Joe is a lot more kind of heavily like online now.
Yeah,
I don't personally think is a bad thing necessarily because I believe that's the future of information and like the bigger a presence the left can have online is going to be really huge. And I think like they're doing a good job of that right now. There's one of our political party leaders, the leader of the Green Party. His name is Zach Polanski. I'm a really, really big fan of him. He's been doing an incredible job lately. He actually has a podcast on YouTube
hmm
called Bold Politics. So it's really good to see actual people who are in politics actually kind of tapping into that online space um, so that it isn't just completely monopolized by the alt right.
yeah. And I also wanted to talk about our party, which I'm sure you're interested to learn about.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, feel free to say whatever you want about it. I don't really know anything about politics in Switzerland, so it would be you'll kind of be my only source of information on this, so I'll trust you.
So we're the best and biggest and strongest party in Switzerland, and everybody votes for us. No, no. We are a party.
Ideal world.
Pardon?
In an ideal world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no. It is our goal, of course, but these things take time. Um, we are a party over the age of 5 years now, and our name is Büezer und KMU Partei. Büezer means somebody who works, but it's not necessarily like the word Arbeiter, which is more used to talk about construction people, so construction workers. It means worker, but it's more a word that includes other kinds of employees instead of just construction workers. And of course, Arbeiter is a very German word, and we don't really like to use German words in Switzerland. We have our own kind of words which we use. And the Und KMU Partei means and small businesses. And
I think
Partei
over
means
email
party.
I saw your party name as like the Workers and Family Business Party, I think is
Yes, exactly.
the word
By
I
KMU,
heard.
small businesses, we more or less mean small family businesses. When you go and get a kebab somewhere, then you have, for instance, a family business. It's not the platform of Mark Zuckerberg, which is really a family. I mean, it might be a family business, but it's not what we mean by family businesses.
Yeah, I mean like small local, but I mean we have a lot of those like in the UK. I feel like they're the main businesses like you'd ideally need to support.
Yes.
Like really the backbone of the economy of entrepreneurship, you know.
And in the past, or even still today, a lot of left wingers despise family businesses because they say they're capitalists and they exploit workers because of the surplus value extraction. But I think in most cases, the family businesses are the ones that work just as much as workers, where even the employee works overtime and, gives a bonus to the worker. Of course, it's not everywhere this the case, but the real issue is the giant corporations, which have a massive influence, a massive power, even over our country. Even during elections, they can make a lot of propaganda and lobbying is even legal in Switzerland. There are politicians which have good connections to lobbyists, and that's somehow legal, which I find.
It's very prevalent in the UK as well, and especially in America, where you saw the amount of money that like Elon Musk was giving to Trump, and like how much he was mass promoting him over social media.
Yeah, and I mean, it shouldn't. In our opinion, it shouldn't be legal to pay someone to vote a certain way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because well, you see what that inevitably leads to if you go just a bit overseas, and like even in the UK, even our centre left, like political leader Keir Starmer, got millions of pounds in donations from hedge funds. He's Many of his like front benchers have received huge donations from the private healthcare sector, and so it all of that, when you look at that, kind of just helps to. And you see, notice a lot of US politicians have funds from Israeli lobbyist groups as well.
Hmm.
So like, I feel like it's when people learn about that, they almost like lose faith in politics as a way, mainstream politics in a way. And so that's why I feel like when a bold kind of left wing alternative arises, like what Zach Polanski and the Green Party have managed to create in the UK, the Green Party now actually has more members than the Conservative Party does, which
Oh,
is
that's
it's very
interesting.
recent. The Greens have doubled in membership in like the past 2 months alone, because Zach has done like a really good job re-energizing people, giving people hope again, which I feel like is something people need a
That's
lot
very
of.
interesting because in Germany and Switzerland, the Greens have completely fallen out of favor. In Germany, because they are pro war, and in Switzerland, because they hate nuclear, they hate cars, they hate anything which somehow produces CO2, or so they basically hate humans. Kind of. They hate the worker, of course. They hate family businesses. They're um, sometimes I think they're kind of like a cult, and this is why our party colors are red, blue, and green. Red is for work, for labor. Blue is for technology, and green is for environment. Because we do believe the environment is important. Of course, climate change exists, and of course, it's not the working families which are at fault, but it's the giant corporations which are causing this massive CO2 increase. And and there's no need to have a party for work, a party for technology, a party for economics, a party for environment. We believe that these topics all belong together, and this is also we have the star emblem, which is over all three colors because it unites these topics, and the star represents the hand of the worker or the hand of the human, whatever you want to call it. And it is white for our Swiss neutrality or the snowy mountains, if you want.
I
So,
mean, I think like, yeah, I mean, you can't real. I feel like a lot of people accuse Zach in particular of moving too far away from the environment, but I feel like he said this himself, that you can't just focus solely on the environment without focusing on economic justice at the same time. When again you realize how much of our pollution is being caused by billionaires. Like, there's literally one of our big water companies called Thames Water was literally dumping sewage into a lot of our waters. So our water is like very much privatized. So they were literally dumping sewage into a lot of our rivers and our seas. So it's obviously just an absolute disgrace to see. And so, like, if you can talk about like the environment going really badly whilst also talking about economic issues that most people care about, like most people are obviously going to be angry seeing. Most people were absolutely furious when they saw Thames Water dumping like sewage into our water. So it's a very easy kind of way to get both at the same time, if you know what
yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, that even I'm half English, so that even makes me angry. I don't think that's right. In Switzerland, we have a lot of non-private water. We don't have this huge privatization with water. Uh, it's usually controlled and filtered by the different municipals. Um, and of course, we have water from the mountain and all of that. But we did have one or two cases where corporations or businesses in general have tried to pollute it or have polluted it. Do you have any questions about Switzerland or our party in general?
I'm not so sure. I feel like you did a good job of explaining like what your party was about the issues that you focused on, and that I feel like Swiss politics in a way was a lot more similar in a way to the UK. That a lot of the issues you guys are facing are sort of similar
Hmm.
to a lot of the issues that we're facing, whether to be with like environmental degradation, with decline, like social issues, like I guess incelism, of like the rise of the far right. So I was kind of pleasantly surprised in a way, I suppose, to hear that like these are kind of global kind of problems in a way.
Hmm. Our goal as a party is to have a Bürgerneue Schweiz, which means a people's oriented Switzerland, which is where family businesses, workers, and farmers have much more say in politics, and of course at the at the workplace, that they can talk much more about what the companies do.
So as an ambulance goes past.
And uh, take away the power from giant corporations. For instance, in the housing market, we think giant corporations shouldn't be at all. And if possible, if we do allow giant corporations to exist, they should serve the interest of our country. They should be building things which the public can use. They should be making our country more prosperous, not damaging it and enriching themselves. Because
I think you've
otherwise, what is even the point of these giant corporations?
think you've got a pretty good sales pitch there. Not gonna lie. Um, yeah, I feel like, again it's the same over here as well. That if we retake our industries into public ownership, like it's something that the government did actually talk about, but they haven't really talked about it much lately. Like when say they're going to privatize the rail, like as in nationalize the rails, nationalize water, and the energy companies that were privatized. Have been the railways have been privatized since the 90s. A lot of stuff been privatized since the 80s. Um,
By
and
Thatcher.
yeah, by Thatcher, and then even the new Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair,
Mm-hmm.
he kind of continued on Thatcher's kind of economic legacy of neoliberalism. So the UK privatized its industries probably more so than really any other European country. Um, we did very much follow the United States in that regard of just privatizing pretty much everything. The only exception, of course, was our health service, but because there was just way too much public support for that.
I personally got interested in the history of Labour, the Labour Party, and I watched a documentary on the wilderness years where Labour basically tried every kind of uh, political position there was on the left, from the extreme to medium, and in the end they moved gradually more and more towards neoliberalism, and were just as similar as the Conservative Party. And I think it more or less has stayed this way because they said, well, we're getting votes now, so we do it. But it doesn't really, um, in my view, I can't of course speak for for all English people, but in my view, I don't really think they're working in the interest um, of the working people, but rather of their donors, and probably to some extent for the giant corporations.
I mean, most British people also feel that way because Keir Starmer's a very unpopular prime minister, and a lot of the stuff he's been doing, especially with his like rampant support for Israel and his. He was only pressured into recognizing a Palestinian state, but even since then, he's continued exporting weapons to Israel. So that's been a massive sink on his personal reputation. The fact he tried to implement benefits cuts, but he had to walk back on most of them at the last minute due to a potential backbencher rebellion in his own
Hmm.
party. So, but the Labour Party has since tanked in the polls. It won 33% of the vote, though it managed to get like 60% of the seats because of the way the UK's voting system works. Um, but now they've tanked to about 20% in the polls and are now 10 points behind the hard right Reform Party that they used to be 20 points ahead of.
So, what what is your view on the Israel-Palestine issue?
I'm very much in favour of a independent Palestinian state. I believe we should stop exporting weapons to a country that like the International Court of Justice has ruled as being a genocide. We should put economic sanctions on them at a minimum, um, and that we need to kind of get together as an international community and collectively demand this because that's the only way that Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu's gonna stop doing what he's doing right now. Because what's going on right now is just an absolute disgrace, and the fact that I think it's been a massive wake up moment to a lot of people just watching just how much the government has just continued to support Israel, even in spite of all of the atrocities going on in Gaza. Like, it's massively woken people up, I
Hmm.
feel.
So a lot of people on the left have the same view as you do. We have a different take on it. We are in favor of Swiss neutrality because we think it actually protects our country and it helps our people, and it can also help other countries. So on the Palestine-Israel issue, we call it that we because we don't really want to pick a side. That does not mean that we want to support Israel and send weapons, or to Hamas send weapons, because we think Switzerland generally should not be exporting weapons. We shouldn't be exporting weapons.
That's
And it,
honestly a fair position to take, honestly.
pardon?
Like, as long as just, that's a fair position to take because, like, if you're standing on, I guess, that sense of principle, and I mean, Switzerland has historically been a neutral country for the last 200 years, so it's an understandable position to take. I feel like for the UK, it's a bit different because of like the UK's history in the region, and
Hmm.
that the UK does just have a lot more power projection than Switzerland, which has been historically neutral. I feel like the UK has as a member of the UN Security Council, definitely has should have a lot of bargaining power in this issue.
We also believe I've written another book. Actually, it's called "Consistent Neutrality," left or with left, because it's a kind of um, it's a wordplay kind of. With left means easy, but it's also with left because we are left wing. We believe that in the foreign policy generally, pushing for intervention has mostly caused more problems than it has helped. So if you look, for instance, what the United States has done in the 1970s, how they intervened in Guatemala, El Salvador, Chile, all these Latin American countries, they took a bad situation and made it 10 times worse. And I also go further in the book and ask who gives us the right to intervene in another country. So, for instance, if you say we should sanction the US because of what Trump is doing, we should be trying to topple his government, or for instance, with North Korea, we should topple their government, does that then also mean that North Korea is allowed to topple our government? According to that logic, according to this moral superiority, it would mean that they would be allowed to do that. And so we say that, for instance, in these countries, if people want to topple their government, they can do that. Switzerland shouldn't be arming either side. Like, for instance, the US has been doing that with the Contras in
Nicaragua.
Nicaragua, yes, for instance. Because, first of all, it makes us a culprit. And if we're no longer seen as neutral in a third world war, we'll be attacked. So there are a lot of downsides. And instead, and you've mentioned the Security Council, instead we want to reform the UN so that every country has one vote in every say, of course. And this whole veto right thing is extremely undemocratic, and it really it stifles the UN. And I mean, when the UN decides something, fuck all happens, because it's toothless. It's like a line with no teeth.
The UN can't really do much to aid Palestine, because even though 4 of the 5 UN Security Council and over 150 countries have made it clear that they aim to recognize the Palestinian state, the one country that doesn't is the United States, and just their veto alone means the Security Council can't do anything, which I think is just absurd how one country can overrule over 100 others. So I
Definitely.
definitely get your point there.
But even the, I mean, I know that they're the founders originally of that of the United Nations, the founding powers, and it wasn't actually Russia. It used to be the Soviet Union, but for some reason it's just Russia which has the veto power. But also, it's supposed to represent the entire world, and how can it do that if it favors a bunch of countries? It's not really democratic.
Exactly, yeah. As well as the fact that the UK and France were added at the time in which was 1945. Obviously, Britain and France ruled over like massive empires, which, well,
Yeah.
obviously today they don't. So it doesn't really make much sense anymore, in particular, especially even with countries like Russia that have invaded, like Ukraine, for example, to be part of a UN Security Council. I guess you could maybe argue similar things with Britain and America as well, to be fair. So maybe there shouldn't even be a Security Council at all, which would be a fair position, and have all the countries in the world would each get a vote. And in order for like a resolution to pass, there would have to be at least 2/3 support, maybe. It's just something I thought of.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yes, and on the Palestine Israel issue, we've closely paid attention on both sides, on pro-Israel and pro-Palestine, and we often see, you know, how they talk about crimes and such, but both sides never seem to be very critical, ever really critical of themselves. It's the other side, but so, for instance, Palestinian side, yes, people in Gaza are starving. Yes, it's a terrible situation. The infrastructure, which we talked about earlier, is being bombed to shit, and that's why people are trying to escape. Of course, they're being bombed, and violations are being made. There's crimes being committed, but also there is a Hamas, and they are doing things. They don't say that. They don't say that part. At least in Switzerland, they don't say that. And on the Israel side, they say we're being attacked by Hamas, and Palestine doesn't exist, it's part of Israel and all of that. But they don't talk about how they kick people out of their homes. They don't talk about how they use illegal munition, even which is against international law, like the repetitive rep. What's it called? It's the rapidly projectile missile, I think it's called. It's like a bullet that goes like that, and it's illegal internationally, even by the UN, and yet they're using it. So we see both sides being hypocritical, and on both sides, civilians are being injured. On one side, you have a government with a huge military and huge support from all countries around the world, and on the other, you have um, well, some say it's an elected government, Hamas. I'm not really sure if it is, if it's not, and how much it's being supported by other countries. But we don't see self criticism on both sides. And this is why we don't really want to support either side, or be pro a side. And the same thing was actually with the Russia Ukrainian war. Of course, what Russia did is a violation of international law. Ukraine is a sovereign country and all of that. But also, there is the question of NATO and all of that. But the Russians don't criticize themselves, and neither do the Ukrainians.
I mean, I feel like when I say like I'll be pro-Palestine, I mean like the solution that would be best for the majority of the Palestinian people,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be as in having a fully independent state that they should have had from the very beginning. Um, and so, and I feel like it's the same for Ukraine, as in the complete independence of Ukraine, and that how Russia has been bombing their country and destabilizing their country for years and years. So really, at the end, all I just want is the best outcome for the people, for the majority of people living there. I believe that full independence and sovereignty for both countries is absolutely the way to go forward with that. But like obviously I don't believe we should be sending soldiers in, or even maybe sending weapons. I believe most of this should be diplomatic, 'cause I'm not like an aggressive war hawk on foreign policy. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I'm kind of the opposite. Because we saw like when America went into the Middle East, we saw how bad that went, both for the people who live there and also
Definitely.
geopolitically.
This is why we believe that Switzerland should be going to these conflicts actively and bringing the conflict parties to a table, similar to what Trump is doing, but actually doing it, not beating around the bush and trying to blame one side and look as best as possible, and then stall conversations and talk about how you're the best, and in the end not even really solving the conflict, because being a neutral force, well, force is maybe a bad word, but being a neutral party is much more um, believable than when you're the US and you're supporting Israel, and then you're going and saying, yeah, okay, Hamas will stop fighting and Israel will stop fighting. Well, but it's the pro-Israel side which is saying that, so why should we believe that?
And also, Israel broke the ceasefire just immediately after that, to the surprise of literally no one. So,
I did
I
hear
mean,
about that, yeah. But yeah, of course, currently our foreign policy is pro-Israel and pro-Ukraine. We even had Zelensky in our parliament, which I don't really think is the way to go. We had peace talks without Russia, so it was just fancy dinners basically for the rich and the politicians, which we criticized. Um, yeah, but we believe that might is right is not a way which we can do anymore in foreign policy. And so we aren't even pro this whole idea of multipolarity, if you heard about this at all, because we also see that countries like Russia and China, they're interfering. They're supporting certain left-wing organizations and parties. They're funding them. They're talking to them. So they're just as interventionist. And we want Switzerland to be neutral, non-interventionist in culture, in economics, and in politics. And that is truly consistent neutral, which Switzerland basically has never been.
I'd argue that's a pretty fair position to hold. It causes you guys to have a lot less, trouble on the world stage. I mean, I guess I believe in internationalism. Like, I believe we should have a more internationalist foreign policy. That we shouldn't. Now, maybe NATO is complicated at the moment just because of the Russia Ukraine war and because of what Trump has been doing lately. But I mean, I guess the UK would obviously have a different view from Switzerland because Switzerland's been historically neutral while the UK's been a NATO member right from its beginning. And the UK trades so much with America and
Mm-hmm.
with the rest of Europe in particular that it's just very, very difficult to have true internationalism, if you know what I mean. But I suppose that's just like kind of what I would like lean to. I suppose is like an internationalist foreign policy where we don't get militarily involved, sort of like how France and Germany didn't get militarily involved in the Iraq War, which I believe obviously Tony Blair's decision and his government's decision to get involved in Iraq was a massive, massive, massive mistake.
Definitely. And they have no right to do so.
So
Even
yeah,
even internationally, unless a country attacks another country, it's not right to attack.
yeah, obviously, yeah,
That's even in the UN Charter.
yeah, totally agree with that.
All right. Do you have any last remarks?
I have really enjoyed it though. Like I'm glad we talked about pretty much all of the things that I did really want to talk about leaving the far right, about leaving all of those ideas, and I hope this reaches the people that it does need to reach. Um,
I do hope that as well. I would give you the links to my books. They're both on Amazon, but the trouble is they're in German. Maybe in the future, the one on neutrality will be written in English. Um, but yeah, at the moment, we're focusing mostly on Switzerland because even with Swiss people, most people think that we should be pushing for intervention, sanctioning countries, and even sanctioning hurts usually more the population than the government.
that
Um,
is true as well. Yeah, that is true.
yeah.
So that's a good argument you could make against sanctions. I don't know how much I personally believe in that at the moment, but
So you're still developing, kind of, probably.
I'd say so. Yeah, I don't know if there'll ever be a time where my views are like fully developed. So I feel like I'm constantly learning new things and like changing my views on certain things based off of like new information that I find out. Especially as I'm still going through university,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like I keep learning new things. So
So for us, it's more we've been influenced by different sides in politics, of course. And I used to be more left, if well, not really more left, but more um, kind of lifestyle left than I am now. And our views are now more clear, centralized, and free from hypocrisy, um, because we think that that is actually the way to go forward. I am actually the chairman of the Workers' and Family Business Party of the BKP. I'm also the co-founder, and I'm also part of the board of directors. Yeah.
Must be a lot of work to run a political party.
Yes, definitely, yeah, it is. And of course, it's difficult because we're not being supported financially by giant corporations, and I don't think they really have an interest.
If you're not being funded by big corporations, though, because it means you stick with principle, even if it is a bit harder to get off the ground. I mean, the Green Party in the UK is funded by its members pretty much exclusively, so if you could just build that small kind of grassroots base of support, then
Well, I always argue we do take your money. If giant corporations want to pay us money, we'll gladly take it, but we don't make politics your way. We still make politics for the working people. And we are not corruptible.
I'll take your word for it.
So thank you very much for taking your time, and I'm sorry I don't speak as much English as I used to, so it's probably
Honestly, it's fine.
decreased.
I don't mind at all. Like, you had a good interview anyway. I could understand what you were saying. So,
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And if you're ever interested in our party, want to learn more, even become a member or something, you can let us know. I think that concludes the interview.
yeah, thanks a lot for it. I really appreciate it. Like, being interviewed by someone who's a leader of a political party is honestly like it's a bit something I obviously didn't expect in the slightest. But
All right. Have a nice evening.
you too. See you
Thank you.
later.
And good luck with politics in the UK.
Thanks. I'll desperately need it.
I
And
can
good
see
luck
it,
to
yeah.
yours in Switzerland as well.
Thank you. All
Goodbye.
right. Have a nice evening. Bye.